All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jackie Betts, the Gladstone City Administrator, and thank you for volunteering with the City of Gladstone. The main objective of ethics training for public officials who volunteer is to improve integrity, prevent corruption, and to provide good public service. Tonight, you're going to hear from two of our city attorneys, Ashley and Emily, regarding ethic laws in Oregon. We want to provide you accurate information to be a successful volunteer. Before we get started, I want to remind you that you should have received a copy of the city's social media policy. Board, commission, and committee members are asked to review the policy and make themselves familiar with the policy when utilizing social media sites as a city volunteer. The second document you received is a volunteer timesheet. Volunteers are asked to track any hours you volunteer to the city. The city will keep track of your attendance at any boards, committee, or commission meetings, and those hours do not need to be included on the timesheet. Board, commission, and committee members are also asked to review Gladstone Municipal Code Chapter 2, specifically Chapter 2.10 in regards to boards, commissions, and committees generally. This is general information for all of our volunteers, and it includes specific information on the board that you are volunteering on. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ashley to start with our presentation tonight.
I'm actually going to interrupt. Sorry, Jackie. My name's Emily Madisar, and like Jackie said, I work for the city attorney. I do want to just briefly, I did this presentation last year. I saw that it was a year and a week ago exactly tonight. And I've been with BEH for about 2.5 years. And I just want to give Ashley Dugill, our newest attorney, a brief introduction. She joined us a few months ago from Vestas, the wind energy company. And she's a great addition, and she's going to get the presentation started, and then I'll take over towards the middle. So Ashley, take it away.
Thanks. Let me just share my screen here. 1 second. There we go. Can everyone see? Yep. All right. And from the beginning, there we go. All right. Emily already gave me an introduction. Emily and I are from BEH, Barry, Elsner, and Hammond, and we're the legal representation for the city of Gladstone. So just really quickly, just an introduction and overview of the goals for tonight. Our goal isn't to make you become an expert, but instead to just try to gain some of the tools and so that you can recognize key issues as they arise and then come to us for assistance. We will be covering authority, public meetings, public records, and then Emily will cover government ethics laws and also political activities. So first, we just want to say and reiterate a big thank you to all of you for volunteering your time. You make our jobs possible, and also, you keep the city running. So we couldn't do this without you, and we really appreciate you. So jumping right into authority, it's important to remember that you can only act as a body. So generally speaking, neither the charter or the municipal code grants powers to individual members of the city council or boards and commissions to act on behalf of the city. You have to act as a group. Members are expected to abide by the decisions of their body, whether or not the member voted on the prevailing side. If an individual member is authorized to represent the city before the public or another government agency, the member must support and advocate for the official city position. So regardless of how you personally voted, once you are representing the city, you have to advocate the official position of the city. Personal opinions and comments should be expressed only if you make clear that you're acting in an individual capacity and not representing the city's position. And this is important to remember in all contexts, right? So even on social media, anytime you might be speaking on the city's behalf, make sure that you are clarifying that this is in your individual capacity. So open and public meetings, just generally under state law, elected and appointed officials must meet in public to make or deliberate towards decisions. So the purpose of this rule is just to encourage transparency in the government. And who's subject to this law? It's a governing body of a public body. So this just generally means basically every governing body. So city councils, county boards of commissioners, school boards, et cetera, planning commissions, park board subcommittees, and even citizen groups that are formed to advise public bodies. So what are the legal requirements for a meeting, a public meeting? First, you need notice. So you need notice of the time and place, and that must be reasonably calculated to inform interested persons. And this usually means at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. And personal notice has to be given to anyone who requests it. The notice has to include the main subjects that are going to be discussed at the meeting. And this description has to be specific enough that it allows someone to decide if they feel if it's necessary to attend, but not so specific that they don't have any reason to attend, basically. The public body is not precluded from considering additional items during the meeting, even if they aren't listed in the subjects to be discussed. So some location considerations when deciding where to hold the public meeting. This meeting must be within your jurisdictional boundaries, unless you're attending a training where there's no deliberations, or if you're meeting with another governing body. But if you're meeting with another governing body, it needs to be either within your jurisdiction or their jurisdiction. It can't just be anywhere. You must allow remote, phone or teleconference option to attend. And the location must be of a sufficient size relative to the expected interest in the meeting. So you need to have enough space for anyone who wants to attend or who you expect to attend. The location doesn't need to be a government building, but it may not be held in a location where discrimination based on race, creed, sex, color, age, national origin, disability is practiced. So for example, it needs to be accessible for people with disabilities. It couldn't be in a location that is advertised as being discriminatory against one of those listed, etc. So some additional legal requirements when it comes to voting, votes must be tallied and attributed to each member of the governing body. And you may use paper ballots, but those votes cannot be secret. And as far as minutes and record keeping goes, minutes don't need to be verbatim, but they have to at least include roll call, motions, resolutions, actions, etc., any results of votes, and the substance of any discussions, any and all discussions. Under some circumstances, audio or video recordings of the meetings are enough instead of minutes. And records of executive session discussions must be kept. And I'll talk a little bit more about executive sessions later in the presentation. So controlling public meetings. Generally, under state law, the public has a right to attend and observe, but not participate in public meetings. Sometimes state law or local laws or bylaws of a board or commission allow limited public participation, for example, a public comment period. Generally, you can establish time limits for public comment, but these standards need to be applied equally to all. So you couldn't have 3 minutes for one individual and then 5 minutes for another company. And you may not remove a member of the public from a meeting unless you can clearly demonstrate the individual is disrupting the meeting in a way that precludes your Board of Commission from conducting business. So this is a kind of sticky one, and we just recommend, we think that best practice is just to avoid removing people altogether unless you're totally sure that you have a right to do so. For example, standing in the back of a meeting and passively protesting with a sign, regardless of how personally offensive you may find that sign, that's not enough to remove someone for disrupting a meeting. It needs to really be extreme. And so we always recommend best practices to actually pause the meeting and continue it at a later date, and use this removing of the individual just as an absolute last resort to avoid First Amendment claims, First Amendment violation claims. So what actually is a meeting? State law addresses public meetings in two different ways. First, all meetings of a public body must be in public. And state law says that all meetings of the governing body of a public body shall be open to the public, and all persons shall be permitted to attend any meeting except executive sessions. And again, we'll talk about that later. And a quorum may not meet in private. And again, the state law says a quorum of a governing body may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating towards a decision on any matter except for executive sessions. So diving down into that a little bit, what really is a meeting? It means the convening or the gathering of a governing body, of a public body, for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or deliberate towards a decision on any matter. So a meeting doesn't include any on-site inspection of any project or program. And it also doesn't include the attendance of members of a governing body at any national, regional, state association to which those members belong. So in this definition, a quorum is required to be able to be a public meeting. So what is a quorum? There's always some minimum number of members that must participate in a public meeting in order for a body to transact business. And this minimum number is a quorum of the body. State law doesn't have a definition of quorum, but it leaves it up to local governments to decide individually. And under Gladstone's municipal code, a majority of the voting members shall constitute a quorum for the conduct of business, and concurrence of a majority of those members shall present, or of the members present, shall be required to decide any matter. And unless otherwise specified, all boards, commissions, and committees will consist of 7 members. So a majority of 7 would be 4. And so for Gladstone, in most cases, a quorum is 4, at least 4 of voting members present. So moving on, a gathering of less than a quorum of a governing body is not a meeting. So if you have less than 4 members of a governing body present, then you do not have a quorum and you do not have a public meeting. Subcommittees of a body constitute governing bodies in and of themselves. So the quorum would be a majority of a subcommittee as well. Remember though, a quorum of a governing body may not meet in private for the purpose of deciding on or deliberating toward a decision on any matter. So if you have a group of 4 or more of a governing body, they cannot meet in private for this purpose. So when does a body actually meet? Under a recent Oregon case, the Oregon Supreme Court explained that it actually is possible for a quorum of a governing body to meet in a way that violates state law, even if there's no actual meeting. And the court determined that people comprising a governing body can meet even when not convening a meeting. So this means that a governing body may violate the Oregon Public Meetings Laws prohibition on meeting in private, even if a quorum never gathers in the same time or the same place. So this decision basically covers this idea of serial meetings. And serial meetings occur when a series of communications of any kind, directly or through intermediaries, to discuss, deliberate, or take action takes place between a quorum of a governing body. So this is true, even though at no time does a quorum of the governing body communicate at the same time or in the same place about the topic in question. So it's basically a constructive communication. It happens through either maybe like an email chain, if you have a bunch of people CC'd, and it just so happens that in the CC'd individuals, it totals a quorum of members of a governing body, then potentially you could accidentally create a serial meeting through that email chain, or even talking through an intermediary, talking through a third party about topics that you're trying to deliberate towards a final decision on, that could accidentally create a serial meeting. So can a quorum of governing body ever even meet in social gatherings or in social settings? Yes, but just with a few caveats. The meeting has to be purely social. So you have to avoid any talking shop. Governing body should avoid any discussion of official business. At some point, such discussion could turn a social gathering into a meeting. And just to remember, attendance at conferences, trainings, etc., are excluded from the definition of meeting. So you don't have to worry about this in those settings. So just some best practices for public meetings. Board and commission members should refrain from using the reply all function on emails so that they can avoid that serial meetings issue. Board and commission members should refrain from serial communications via email, telephone, face-to-face, or even social media postings, such as Facebook. Board and commission members should not use staff or other individuals as intermediaries, because this could also lead to serial meetings. So, executive sessions. This is that exception that I was alluding to earlier. Public bodies may meet in executive sessions only in very specific statute delineated circumstances. Any circumstance which you can meet for an executive session is already laid out explicitly in state law. An executive session is defined as any meeting or part of a meeting of governing body that is closed to certain persons for deliberation on certain matters. So it allows a public body to discuss certain matters in a private, somewhat private setting. The public body may hold an open session even when the law permits it to hold an executive session. So if it prefers, it could take those private topics and discuss it in the public. A public body is authorized to hold closed sessions regarding the following subjects: real property transactions, exempt public records, pending or threatened litigation, employees, and labor negotiations. And those are all laid out again in state statute. So no executive session can be held for the purpose of taking any final action or making any final decision. And the purpose of this requirement is just to allow the public to know the results of the discussions. Taking a formal vote in open session satisfies that requirement, even if the public vote merely confirms consensus reached in executive session. So if you declare that you're entering executive session, you deliberate on a topic in executive session, and then you return to the public and then vote affirmatively or negatively on that topic, then that is enough. You've satisfied the requirement, even if you haven't discussed that topic in public. If the body meets in executive session, members should attempt to provide direction or consensus to staff. All contact with other parties must be left to the designated staff or representatives handling the issue. Unless required by law, no member of a board or commission should make public the discussions or information obtained in executive session. Again, that is just the point of executive session, is to keep it private and not share it, keep it confidential. So must follow specific procedures when entering executive session. The person who is presiding at the meeting must announce the statutory authority for the executive session before going into closed session. So again, that's all listed out in state statute. Before entering, you should reference the specific statute that gives you authority to be entering into executive session. The body must also announce if they plan to return to open session to take action following the executive session. So if you're planning to vote on what is discussed in the executive session, then you should announce there before you enter that you're planning to return to the open session. Media is actually permitted to attend the executive session in most situations, but they cannot report on what they hear at that executive session, but they can use the information that they hear to follow leads. And the main takeaway from public meetings is you should not make or deliberate towards making a decision with a quorum of your board or commission outside of a properly noticed public meeting. Just avoid any discussions or final decisions in this context. All right, so moving on to public records. Oregon law requires both inspection and preservation of public records. And public records are really broadly defined to include any writing containing information related to the conduct of the public's business. And the term writing is defined in statute, but it's very broad and expansive. And it basically means everything that's listed here and more. It can mean handwriting, typewriting, printing, photographing, any means of recording, letters, texts, even voicemails, though the city isn't required to keep those. But if you do have them when they're requested, then you may need to provide them. The city can charge a reasonable fee for these inspections. And there are exemptions that exist in state law that allow the city to keep certain ones of these writings confidential for various reasons if they're requested to be inspected. So the city must follow the record retention policy that's approved by the Secretary of State Archives Division. And they must keep one official copy of each record for the applicable retention period. And that retention period is set out by the Secretary of State. And the destruction of public records in a manner that is inconsistent with the approved record retention policy. So if you destroy them before that period of time is up, that is actually a criminal offense. Just gonna drink some water here. Okay, so this duty to maintain and make available public records, it extends to elected and appointed officials, not just employees. So this means social media posts, text messages, emails to personal addresses and home computers have to be kept. Even after individual email messages are deleted from an individual's work computer area, the messages may continue to exist on computer backup tapes for at least a short period of time. Emails on backup tapes remain public records. As with any public record, a public body must make all non-exempt email available for inspection and copying regardless of its storage location. So this is really important to keep in mind if you have, one phone that you use for public and private, public and then personal messages, public and personal emails, etc. You may have to make that available for inspection, and it's really important to keep those two things very separate in your personal computer, personal phone, etc. So the main public records takeaway, make sure that at least one copy of any record you use related to your official capacity is being kept in accordance with the city's record retention policy. And also I would just add to keep in mind, like I was just saying, to just remember what personal items you're using for what. If you're using your personal computer or your personal phone, or even your personal social media accounts, just keep it in mind that this may become a public record. And just before moving on to Emily's part of this presentation, I just wanted to note as well that the Attorney General Public Records and Meetings Info and Manual is a really good resource if you're wanting to look up any more of this information on your own, or if you have any more questions on any of this.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about government ethics and political activities. So Oregon government ethics laws state as a policy that service as a public official is a public trust, and one safeguard for that trust is the people require all public officials to comply with the ethics laws. Now, the law has various parts, and we're going to go over most of these tonight. Abuse of office, reporting requirements, conflicts of interest, nepotism, gifts, use of confidential information, and then the Ethics Commission and penalties. And we're not going to talk in depth about nepotism. There's no slide for that, so I just want to very briefly go over it. The nepotism laws, which are in the Oregon government ethics laws, state that a public official may not participate in basically any employment action, which includes the appointment, the employment, the promotion, the discharge, the firing, or demotion of a relative or the member of their household. So that's what the nepotism law states. It also states that a public official may not directly supervise their relative or member of household unless local policy exempts it. And one last thing on nepotism, it does not apply to volunteers. So if you are a public official and your relative is a volunteer for the organization, then the nepotism laws don't apply and you can participate in employment actions. Okay, so now back to our regular program here. We're going to talk about abuse of office. Now, what that means is that public officials may not use or attempt to use their position to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment that would not otherwise be available but for the holding of their official position. So we'll talk a little bit more about what exactly that means. It applies to the public official and their relatives, as well as their members of the household and businesses with which the official is associated. So what that basically means is that the financial benefit or detriment cannot come down to you or your relatives or your members of the household or your associated. Now, there are of actions that a public official may or participate in would constitute the prohibited use or attempted use of your office. Uh-oh, I'm getting a notice that my internet is unstable. All right, can you hear me? Give me a thumbs up, Ashley, if you can hear me okay. Okay. All right, so I think people have a misconception that voting is the only sort of official action they have to worry about for abuse of office, but that's not the case. The use of a position could be voting. That definitely is a risk, but there are many, many other actions, such as placing a signature on a government agency's document, something as simple as making a recommendation, making a purchase with government agency funds, conducting personal business on a government agency's time or with a government agency's resources, which includes, computers, vehicles, heavy equipment, or office machines. And I think it's easier to sort of conceptualize what abuse of office means with an example. And I'm going to give lots of examples throughout because I really think that the ethics laws become sort of more real when you hear examples. So my favorite example of abuse of office is a city employee was purchasing many, many vehicles for the city fleet, which was, he worked in purchasing, I think. And this is a real life example that's available on the Government Ethics Commission website, which is really a good resource. Like Ashley mentioned, the AG Public Records Manual, Public Records and Meeting Manual, the Oregon Government Ethics Commission website has just tons of resources to help you understand the laws. So anyways, city employee was purchasing a bunch of vehicles for the city fleet at a big discount because he was essentially buying in bulk. And he decided to use that discount to buy himself a vehicle. Now, he didn't use any public agency dollars. He used his own money to buy this personal vehicle for himself. He just wanted to take advantage of the discount. Even though he used his own money, it was still abuse of office because he used his position at the city to obtain a financial gain in the form of a big discount on a vehicle that would not otherwise be available to him but for his position as at the city. That's not a discount that's available to anyone off the street. It's a discount that he got because the city, I don't know if it was because the city was a public entity or because they were purchasing so many vehicles, but it was but for his position at the city. And so it was still, even though he didn't use public dollars, he used his own money, it was still a violation of the law. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about definitions here because public officials, abuse of office applies to relatives, members of the household, and businesses with which the official is associated. And that's the first one we're going to talk about. So that means a private business, if the person, meaning the public official or their relative or member of the household, is a director, officer, owner, or employee or agent of the business, or if the person owns or has owned more than $1,000 worth of stock, equity interest, stock options, or debt interest of the private business in the preceding calendar year. Now, the definition includes a publicly held corporation if the person is an officer or director of the publicly traded company, or if the person owns or has owned more than $100,000 worth of stock in the preceding calendar year. It also could include a business that is a source of income that produces 10% or more of the person's total annual household income, file an annual statement of economic interest. And before we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about statement of economic interest. This is the reporting requirements in the list of topics under the government ethics laws. And we don't have a separate slide on that, like nepotism. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. So what is a statement of economic interest? Briefly, it's also referred to as an SEI. It's a statement that you file by April 15th of every year. And it covers your assets from the previous calendar year. And it's essentially like a declaration of income, holdings, and business associations. And it does become a public record. And the ethics laws define who must file a statement of economic interest. And so you should check that or come to us or Jackie or your contact at the city to find out if that's you. Okay. So now let's talk about relatives for the purposes of the abuse of office statute. So relatives include, and I am going to list these even though they're all on the screen, the spouse, parent, step-parent, child, sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law of the public official. And relatives also include the parent, step-parent, child, sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law of the spouse of the public official. Now, if not covered by those previous two definitions, it also includes any individual for whom the public official has a legal support obligation. And lastly, it includes, if are not already covered by the previous three definitions, it also includes any individual from whom the official receives benefits arising from that individual's employment. Then the definition of member of the household is much more straightforward and just includes any person who resides with the public official if they're not covered already by relative. Okay, so that's all for abuse of office. Now we're going to talk about conflicts of interest. So what is a conflict of interest? Conflict of interest, I'm going to read this, but then we're going to talk much more in depth about every part of this definition. So a conflict of interest arises when a decision or recommendation you are making as a public official would or could result in a private pecuniary benefit or detriment, and that just means financial, a private financial benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or a business with which you or your relatives are associated. Now, conflicts of interest come in two forms: actual conflicts and potential conflicts. So what's the difference? An actual conflict of interest arises when a decision or act by you would result in a private pecuniary financial benefit or detriment to you, your relatives, or an associated business, while a potential conflict arises when a decision or act by you could result in such an outcome. Next, we're going to talk about what to do if you have a conflict. So for actual conflicts, meaning when an action would result in a financial benefit or detriment, you must first publicly announce the conflict, and second, you must refrain from any participation in any official action on the issue. And that includes discussion of the matter. So again, like with abuse of office, I think people sort of believe that you just have to refrain from voting, or the only action that is important is voting. But for actual conflicts of interest, you must publicly announce the conflict, and then you can't even discuss it. You can't give your 2 cents on the matter for other people to vote on. You have to refrain from any discussion on the matter, any participation in any official action. Now, what do you do if you have a potential conflict? And again, a potential conflict means you could, an action you take could result in a private financial benefit or detriment. So for potential conflicts, you must publicly announce the potential conflict every time the issue arises. But after you disclose the conflict, you may participate in the official action on the issue. And that includes both discussion and vote. So if the conflict of interest, if it's a potential conflict of interest, then you still can discuss and vote on the matter once you publicly announce and disclose it every time the issue arises. So before we move on, I think it's helpful to go through some examples, because these concepts are so kind of, I'm not going to say foreign, but kind of hard to grasp until you get examples. So I'm going to read a little fact pattern. So a school district has decided to construct a new elementary school, and the school board is at the stage of developing criteria for the construction bid process. A recently elected school board member's son owns a construction company in town. This alone means that the school board member has a potential conflict of interest when participating in official actions to develop the bid criteria, because the official actions she takes could financially impact her son's construction company, which is a business with which her relative is associated. So that's a potential conflict of interest. Just her son having a construction company in town is a potential conflict of interest. So what does she do? What does the school board member do? She publicly announces that her son owns a construction company, which is a potential conflict, every time the issue arises. But once she does that, she still may participate in discussions, votes, and any official action on the issue. So let's tweak the facts a little bit. Same school district is now soliciting bids for the construction of a new elementary school. The bid deadline was last week, and the district superintendent has notified the school board that there are 4 qualified bids, and the school board will be awarding the bid to one of the 4 bidders at an upcoming meeting. One of the qualified bids was submitted by the construction company owned by the school board member's son. This is an actual conflict of interest. The school board member when awarding the bid is met with a conflict of interest because the effect of her decision would have a financial impact, either positive or negative, on her son's construction company, which is a business with which her relative is associated. So what must the school board member do? She must publicly announce the conflict at the meeting, and then she must refrain from participating in any official action on the issue, which includes voting, but also, like I said before, includes discussion of the matter. She can't even discuss it once she's met with an actual conflict of interest. So I have one more tweak to this same fact pattern. So school district soliciting bids for the construction of a new elementary school. One of the qualified bids was submitted by a construction company owned by a board member's best friend. But neither the board member nor any relative of the board member are associated with the construction company. It's just her best friends. The school board member does not have a conflict of interest, potential or actual, when awarding this bid, because the effect of her official decision would not or could not have a financial impact on herself, her relative, or a business with which she or her relative is associated. So there's no conflict of interest there. Now, what should she do? Nothing is legally required when there's no conflict of interest, right? She doesn't have to publicly announce, she doesn't have to refrain from anything. There is no conflict. I would probably still recommend that she announce the appearance of a conflict and state that because it is neither potential nor actual, she will be participating in the discussion and voting on the matter. But that's not legally required. That's just, I think, sort of a best practice and what I would recommend someone do. Okay, so back to our slides. There are exceptions to the conflict of interest laws. The sort of probably most relevant is nonprofits. So I fully expect that people who volunteer for Gladstone's boards and commissions may serve on nonprofit boards as well. And the definition of a business does not include nonprofits where the public official receives no money, no financial benefit, no remuneration. So that you're not met with a conflict of interest if the nonprofit is up for a contract or something. There's also this class exception, which is kind of complicated, but I'm going to try and explain it. First of all, because it's so complicated, you should seek legal advice before relying on it. But I'll explain it a little bit so that maybe, like Ashley said in the introduction, your like spidey senses will tingle and you'll know to ask for help. So the class exception applies where a public official or their relative is part of a class that consists of a larger group of people that is affected by their decision. So an example is a relative. Let's use a city council member here. The city council member's spouse works for the city and is in a union. And the city council member is voting on a collective bargaining agreement that includes a cost of living increase that would go to the entire class that the collective bargaining agreement applies to. And again, that includes their spouse. That would be a conflict of interest because the decision by the council member to vote on the collective bargaining agreement would have a private financial benefit to their relative and member of their household, their spouse that they live with. So that seems like it would be a conflict of interest, but because of this class exception, which again, I'm going to just read the definition again. It applies where the public official or their relative is part of a class that consists of a larger group of people that's affected by their decision. Then the class exception would apply and the city council member could vote on the collective bargaining agreement. Another example that I like to use is if some board member is working on an issue and it involves improvements on a road, and they live on that road. Well, everyone else lives on that road. They're part of they're a member of the class that consists of a larger group of people that's affected by the decision, so the class exception might apply there. But again, you should seek advice before you rely on this. If your spidey sense tingles, then you should find out if you can actually rely on this to participate in the decision. And this is where I want to also mention the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, which I mentioned their website earlier, but they also are extremely helpful, the staff there. And you can pick up the phone and call them. You should never feel like you'll get in trouble just for asking a question. And in fact, it might be the opposite, because the law specifically states that if you formally seek OGEC advice and receive it and then follow it, and that's a formal process, so you can do it informally and then proceed to formal advice. And if you follow that advice, then you're protected from liability. So that means that, let's say you are worried about this class exception. I live on the road? Can I vote on it? Can I not? And Oregon Government Ethics Commission gives you the advice that you can. And then you rely on that to vote on it. If someone complains, you're protected. And the last on this point is that the ethics law, under the ethics laws of Oregon, liability is personal. So if you violate the ethics laws, it's on you. It's not the city. So that's something also to keep in mind, and another reason to, seek advice when you believe something might come up. Okay, next we're going to discuss gifts. And this is actually a kind of a big part of the government ethics laws. So the gift law prohibits public officials, relatives of public officials, and members of the public official's household from soliciting or receiving any gifts over $50 in a calendar year from any source that has or could reasonably be expected to have a legislative or administrative interest in the public official's decisions or votes. Now that's a mouthful, so we're going to break it down a little bit. This point, always look to the source of the gift, sort of applies in a couple different ways. First, it's cumulative, meaning any gift over $50, any gifts over $50 in a calendar year. So that could be 6 gifts that are $10 each from the same source. Or that could be one $100 gift. It's cumulative. So look to the source. How many gifts have you received from that source? Second, the source must be someone who has or could reasonably be expected to have a legislative or administrative interest in essentially your work. So you can receive gifts as a public official, as a volunteer board or commission member. But if the person who's giving you the gift has a legislative or administrative interest in your work, and what that means is basically the typical example is like a lobbyist who is trying to wine and dine someone because they have a legislative or administrative interest in your work. Obviously, the gift law doesn't just apply to lobbyists. It's anyone who has a legislative or administrative interest in your work or in your decisions or votes, but that's sort of the easiest way to understand what that means. So what does that mean? What should you do? What you should do, I think the easiest and sort of most risk-averse thing for you to do is don't accept gifts from anyone who has an administrative or legislative interest in the work that you're doing on your board. But if you do, that's not legally required. So if you do, And a gift could be something as small as a drink, a comped drink. So let's use the drink example. It's unlikely that your comped drink costs $50. A meal could, but let's stick with the drink idea. So if someone with a legislative or administrative interest in your board or commission job wants to buy you a drink, the law doesn't say you can't accept it. You can, but one drink could become 2 drinks, and it's a calendar year. So let's say you see them at one meeting and then don't see them for a few meetings a few months later, and see them again and have another drink. And if you have another drink a few months later, that can add up to over $50, and then you're violating the gift law. So if you decide to accept gifts that are less than $50 from people with a legislative or administrative interest in your work, then I recommend that you keep a record. But again, like I said at the beginning, my advice is generally just not to accept gifts. When you're out to drinks with people who have a legislative or administrative interest in your work, just throw down your own credit card for your drink. All right, so what is the definition of a gift? A gift is anything of economic value, and that includes money, that includes, like I said, drinks, food, pretty much could be anything. But having said that, the definition has so many exemptions, they practically swallow the rule. For example, it excludes gifts from your relatives or members of your household. So you can accept, your father-in-law's trip to Hawaii or whatever. He's your relative. You can accept it. The gift law also excludes gifts in the form of tokens, plaques, trophies, mementos that have a resale value of less than $25, and also gifts that are received as part of your private business, employment, or volunteerism. And the example I like to give there is like, the watch for your retirement or whatever, or some sort of, gift certificate for outstanding volunteerism. And there are lots of exemptions from the definition of gift. Like I said, it practically swallows the rule. So if you're unsure, you should ask. So next topic in government ethics is confidential information. So members of boards and commissions must keep all written materials provided to them on matters of confidentiality under law in complete confidence to ensure the city's position is not compromised. So you shouldn't even mention the information that you read or heard to anyone other than fellow members, city staff participating on the matter, or the city attorney's office. Public statements, information or press releases relating to a confidential matter will be handled by designated staff. You shouldn't have to worry about that. And state law specifically prohibits public officials from attempting to use confidential information gained from your position, gained because of the position held or by carrying out assigned duties to further your personal gain. And I have an example for that. So let's say you find out about, by the nature of your job, you find out about a company that's coming to town and planning to open a big, huge center. And you expect that this is confidential, but you believe that, property values will increase because this new great company is coming to town. If you use that confidential information to rely on that to buy property near the site of the new company coming into town because you expect that it will be very successful and raise the property value, then that's improper use of confidential information. And it might be other ethical laws. You might also violate other ethical laws as well. Sounds like maybe abuse of office too. But that would be an inappropriate use of confidential information. So that basically wraps up our government ethics portion of the presentation. And the takeaway is to basically watch for actions you may take related to your role at the city, whether in a personal or official capacity, that you feel like could affect your financial interests or could affect the financial interests of your relatives, businesses with which you or your relatives are associated, or members of your household. If you watch for that, and like I said, your spidey sense, tingles when those come up, then you'll be fine. We're going to talk just very briefly, maybe not that briefly, about political activities. So again, I hate to do this, but I'm just going to read the law. So ORS 260.432 sub 1 states that a person, including public employers and elected officials, may not actually coerce, command, or require, or attempt to coerce, command, or require a public employee to promote or oppose any political committee or any initiative, referendum, or recall petition, ballot measure, or candidate. So we're going to break this down a little bit. I think I'm going to read the next one before I break it down because it'll help. So stick with me. ORS 260.432 sub 2 states that public employees, and that includes school administrators, city managers, police chiefs, etc. Basically, any city staff would be included as a public employee, may not be involved in promoting or opposing any political committee or any initiative, referendum, or recall petition, measure, or candidate while on the job during working hours. So I just want to break down the political committee or initiative, referendum, recall petition, ballot measure, candidate. Basically, a political issue. A political issue that is voted on. That's maybe a better way to say it. So you cannot, and let's break down this initiative, referendum, or recall petition. That means gathering signatures, for example. You cannot coerce, command, or require a public employee to gather signatures for an initiative, referendum, or recall petition. You cannot coerce, command, or require, or attempt to coerce, command, or require a public employee to promote or oppose, so support or not support any ballot measure, so state or local, or any candidate, state or local, or federal for that matter. I hope that helped break it down a little bit, but we're going to talk about it more anyway. So let's go to the next slide. Under Oregon law on political activities, there's a difference between elected officials and appointed officials. Elected officials mean elected by the people. So that includes city council members. And appointed officials means all other boards and commission members for the city of Gladstone. And those are treated differently. So let's talk, I'll sort of breeze through what elected officials may do because I believe we're mostly board and commission members here. So elected officials have more leeway with what they can do. They may advocate a political position at any time, which includes endorsement of candidates. They may perform campaign activity, but they must exercise caution not to involve public employees' work time. And that's because, again, the law prohibits them from coercing, commanding, or requiring, or attempting to coerce, command, or requiring a public employee to perform campaign activity. And likewise, remember the second section of that law means that, or states that a public employee cannot be involved in campaign activity while on the job during working hours. So both sides would be violating the law if they didn't follow that. So an elected official may vote as part of the city council to support or oppose a measure, but must not use employee staff time to assist with such activities, except for ministerial functions. And ministerial functions means like essentially basic administrative, non-substantive work. So the city recorder's preparation of minutes reflecting the vote. Oftentimes the city recorder signs the ordinance when it's passed. That would not be a violation because it's a ministerial function. So an elected official may also use their own designated public office space and equipment in advocacy activities, but only consistent with the city's as applicable policies on use of public property and equipment. So if you're not sure about that, then you should check the policies. So what can an elected official, not do? Basically, this elected official, and I guess I won't dwell on it because like I said, I don't think they're here. So I'll just read it. They may not request a public employee either on or off duty perform any political activity. That's essentially what I was saying with the last slide. An elected official may also not have an opinion piece or letter that advocates a political position published in the public entity's newsletter or other publication that is produced or distributed by public employees. Essentially, they cannot force a public employee to engage in political activity. And that's what those two things are saying. Okay, so appointed officials, this is more relevant here, I think. Appointed officials may not promote or oppose election petitions, candidates, or measures while acting in their in their official capacity when they are at meetings of the board or commission, working on a duty that is assigned by the board or commission, working on an official publication for the board or commission, or when appearing at an event in your official capacity. So if you're doing any of those things, then you may not promote or oppose political activities. What may you do? Well, appointed officials may use your own personal time to volunteer in a political activity. If you do that, we recommend, especially during working hours or when you're otherwise, generally like taking a break from, I guess if you're volunteering for board or commission, this is less likely to come up in this way, but nevertheless, we recommend that you keep a record of your time. You may also use your title to engage in political activity as long as you're not acting in an official capacity. And you need to make clear that your title is being used for identification purposes only. And the easiest way to do that is to make a clear statement to that effect, such as the one here, Julie Smith, board member, title used for identification only. That should work. So when do the political activity laws kick in? And this is sort of, I don't know how relevant this is right now, but it does become relevant as even the primary election approaches. Hang on, I need a sip of water here. So for initiative, referendum, and recall petition efforts, the political activities laws kick in as soon as the prospective petition is filed with the appropriate elections filing officer. So once that happens, you as an appointed official may not promote or oppose the initiative, referendum, or recall petition while acting in your official capacity. Likewise, for ballot measures referred to the ballot by the city, the political activity law kicks in as soon as the measure is certified to the ballot. And that can be kind of hard to determine because you don't necessarily know when the elections official is going to certify a ballot measure, a statewide or local. So we usually recommend once the ballot measure is referred by the city, that's when we recommend ceasing political activity. just because it's more, you know when that happens, and you may not know the precise moment when the measure is certified to the ballot. For candidate issues, the political activity law kicks in as soon as the person becomes a candidate under the definition in ORS 260.005 sub 1 sub A. And for actions related to a political activity, the political activity law is in effect whenever the political committee is active. So I hope that that helps you guide your understanding. So the takeaway for the political activities is that, except in limited situations that apply only to elected officials, do not engage in political activity in an official capacity, and do not ask or require city staff to do so at all. And I think that pretty much concludes our set presentation. Jackie, do you want to take it away? Our Ashley and my emails are both on the screen there. Oops. But it's okay. We have them available. So do we want to take questions?
I think we have this set up as a webinar.
Okay.
The intent for tonight was, we know we've got some people watching, but we know there are many others who are working. And so we're recording this and we're going to be sending it out to all of our volunteers as a follow-up. If we have questions from them, they can certainly email them to me and I can follow up with Emily and Ashley. Emily, thank you. I know it can be overwhelming because a lot of people are just like, I just wanted to volunteer. I didn't know there was so much involved with it. But I think the scenarios that you described are helpful. And what we like to say is, when you're in doubt, ask staff, because we're here to help you. All of your committees have a department head that is staffing you for that. Additionally, Emily and Ashley provided me 2 documents. One is a public records and meetings document, and the other is Oregon government ethics. So we will also make those available in print and PDF for all of our volunteers. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you to both of you, and that will end our session for tonight.